It looks like I've ruined another piece. This is the second one in the series I've messed up. I'm still going to share how I made this project, and at the end of the video, if you stay tuned, I'll go over my thoughts about where this particular series is going to go. Here we are back at the beginning. This piece is the second piece that I have painted on a used up palette paper. So just to review, the palette paper isn't anything fancy. It's just brown baking paper that I use in my reusable wet palette. I used an oil pencil this time. It's by Cretacolor. I think I'm pronouncing that properly, to outline the face. And then I used matte medium to seal everything in before I start the next layer of painting. After the matte medium dries, I will start in using layers of acrylic paint to make this character come to life. And I'll just sit back and be quiet and let you watch the process. The background color from the palette is interesting, and it's where I saw the initial design for this face. The trick when I'm painting is figuring out which parts of that background I want to leave and which parts I can enhance using other colors. As I paint, I want to make the character vibrant and not muddy. It's also difficult sometimes when you have that background color or design left from the palette to determine where you're going to add value. So I'm just kind of working back and forth here, trying to determine how I want to do the next layers in the painting. I have plans to eventually open a shop, so I chose to photograph my artwork and isolate the piece as a sticker using Photoshop. I do highly recommend photographing your work before any kind of treatment. In this case, I knew I was going to be using resin, but if you're going to preserve it under glass or use resin or anything else over the work, you won't be able to get a high quality print if you treat the item. And in this case, it really saved me, because if I had not photographed my work, I would not have any copy of the original piece available to me. Just finished pouring in the resin, and I used my heat gun this time on each of the resin layers. I don't see any visible bubbles. There's a couple of areas that keep trying to float up, so I'll keep an eye on those. But overall, this second piece looks a lot better than the first. So I pulled this open today, and I had a suspicion when I was mixing there would be an issue. I don't know if you could see right in here, there's a pool of gooey resin. It's still liquid, and I kind of had a suspicion it would be like this because there's a little bit left in this bottle. The other bottle here is completely empty. They're supposed to be a 1-to-1 ratio, so I made a mistake somewhere when I was mixing. There is a fix for it. I went to Art Resin's channel, and there is a tutorial for fixing just this issue. So I'm going to scrape all this off following the tutorial and pour some new resin over the top to fix this. Okay, so here's the finished piece. It was quite a mess to clean up. It involved scraping the gooey resin off, wiping the entire piece down with rubbing alcohol to try to reduce the sticky mess, There was also a sticky mess inside the mold. And then I had a weird case where some of the resin actually stuck to or ate through parts of the silicone mold, which is kind of weird. I have damage to the mold in several spots. I also had an issue, I don't know if you can see, there's a big giant bubble right here. I'm not sure how that happened. It just feels kind of weak. I ended up having to add 2 layers of the resin on top. After I cleaned everything off with rubbing alcohol, I had to sand down parts of it, then wipe it again with rubbing alcohol. I thought I got all the powder off, but evidently there was still some powder in there. And I don't know, there's also, you can see some bubbles that formed after. The interesting thing with the bubbles were not there with the first layer of resin. So initially, when I did the piece, you saw that I thought everything was looking good. I realized that there wasn't enough resin over the top, and that's when I created a second batch of resin and I poured it over. Somehow, the second batch of resin got up underneath there, formed these bubbles underneath on the back, formed the large bubble here, and then created the sticky mess. When I came back in and fixed it, I initially had sanded it off. I put a layer of resin on. You can see, I think right here, can you see that? I'm not sure if you can see it. There's some damage where the resin, the sticky resin was. Even when I sanded it off, I couldn't get all of that part off, and it looks bubbly, but it was just a damaged area. So initially I had put a layer over, hoping that it would make everything clear. Most of it looked okay, but then the back was sticky. I turned it over, put it in the mold, put another layer here, and this layer leaked here and made this kind of ledge all the way around, this uneven ledge. So it dried, but the piece, I don't think it's salvageable. I could try sanding it and putting more resin on it, but I kind of feel like at this point that would just be putting more time and more product into this than I need to do. What I think I need to do, though, is to revisit how I'm doing this series. So this wasn't planned to be a serious art series at all. I just wanted to play with the palette paper that I had, use up something that I would have otherwise thrown out, and create these pieces from it. I was concerned, why I'm using the resin, I was concerned that the paint would peel off the palette paper because it's just brown baking paper. It's kind of non-stick. And I thought resin would be the best way to preserve it, but I'm kind of doubting myself. Maybe I'm overthinking things. And maybe with the next piece, I just put it onto like a really thick piece of watercolor paper and I use matte medium to seal it in. I'm probably overthinking it. I don't want to invest in another mold if I don't need to. I'm also noticing with the mold, it's kind of curving. And with the first piece, I thought I was having issues maybe because, and I came up with all these weird things like maybe my building was tilted or the floor in the apartment was tilted. I think this mold is just not as evenly made as I think it is. I don't know if you can see how the piece kind of just has this curve. It's supposed to be a tray, so it's supposed to be solid, and it's not an even flat plane across the top. And this is self-leveling resin. So anyway, I think I'm overthinking this project. And if I were to sell these as art prints, if I was doing something like this, adding the resin adds a little bit of weight to it, which I would need to consider if I were going to ship this out. If it's something that is on paper, I can reinforce it with cardboard and the cost of shipping is going to be significantly less. So the next piece I'm going to try on paper and we'll see how that goes. I am going to link up the previous video for this in the notes for this video. Anyway, you know, sometimes you learn from mistakes, and when you're creating an art series, this is how you do things. You experiment, you try things, and you find out what works. And again, maybe I'm just overthinking things. So Anyway, I will see you again soon on the channel. It's your turn to go out and create something.